Sister Emmanuella had always believed that serving God was not just a calling but a lifestyle. Raised in Lagos by a strict Christian family and mentored in the Deeper Life Campus Fellowship, she was known for her bold evangelism, uncompromising holiness, and calm confidence in the presence of God. She graduated with a vision to serve humanity and win souls during her youth service year. But like many young graduates, she prayed passionately against being posted to the north. She imagined herself stationed somewhere in the south, perhaps Akwa Ibom or Rivers State, close to comfort, close to development, far from insecurity. Kwara State, especially its northern border, was the last place she wanted to serve. Yet when her posting letter arrived, bold black ink carried a location she never expected: Kaiama, Kwara North. Stories of bandits, kidnappers, and rural hardship had circulated for months online. Friends advised her to redeploy immediately. Relatives warned that NYSC was not worth dying for. But Emmanuella made a decision that surprised even her fellowship leaders. She said, "If God sent me there, then he has already gone ahead of me." With nothing but her suitcase, her Bible, and a conviction that her posting had a purpose beyond comfort, she stepped into a journey that would bring her face to face with death and ultimately reveal the unseen battle between faith and terror. A community on edge. Kaiama was a quiet rural town, resting close to the border between Kwara and Niger State. At first glance, it seemed peaceful. Children played along dusty roads, goats chased one another, and women carried calabashes to the marketplace. But beneath that normality was a tension no outsider could ignore. Villagers whispered at night. Motorcycles moved suspiciously across the forest paths. And many people slept not in their rooms, but in fields or behind bushes, fearing sudden attacks. The first week, Emmanuella noticed something unusual at the government school where she had been posted to teach. The classrooms were half empty, and students came only on certain days. Some teachers never showed up at all. She later discovered that the school had become a ghost institution. Staff avoided it because armed groups had previously kidnapped teachers. One headmistress confessed to her that it was better to have no education than to be abducted for ransom. It was in this atmosphere of fear that Emmanuella began to wonder if she had misheard God. Late at night, strange movements echoed from the nearby forest. Sometimes, rapid motorbike engines broke the silence. Rumors soon reached her ears that extremist groups and bandits were recruiting young boys in nearby villages. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and without options. She had signed that she would not redeploy. She had chosen to stay. Her resolve was being tested. The purpose she believed God sent her here for was unclear. Yet, deep in her heart, she sensed that running away would mean abandoning something God was preparing. Even in her uncertainty, she whispered at night, "Lord, keep me here for your will, not my safety." The faith of a deeper life Corper. In a region where fear dictated decisions, Emmanuella stood out not just because she was a core member but because of her uncompromising lifestyle. She wore long modest skirts even in the scorching heat. Her hair was always neat, natural, and free of attachments. She wore no makeup, carried no fashion trends, and spoke with a calm, spiritual authority that made people look twice. She was not just a teacher, she was a representation of a faith many villagers had only heard of in passing. Every morning before school, she walked through dusty compounds praying for families, encouraging them, and inviting them to church. She prayed for children who fell sick, helped parents struggling with school fees, and visited troubled students after classes. Soon, parents started knocking on her door asking for prayers. A Muslim woman once brought her sick child, and after Emmanuella prayed, the child recovered. From that moment, the woman began referring to her as the praying teacher. Despite the insecurity, the school began to fill up again. Parents felt safer sending their children, believing that the presence of the praying teacher protected them. Her students listened more attentively, behaved respectfully, and grew spiritually curious. The local Deeper Lifehouse Fellowship welcomed her warmly, grateful that God had sent them such a courageous youth corper. Her presence ignited a spark. Children prayed. Mothers prayed. Even men who rarely entered a church asked her for blessings when passing by. In a place suffocated by fear, her faith was becoming a silent revolution. What she did not know was that her revival was happening at the brink of an impending tragedy that would reveal whether faith was merely words or a shield stronger than bullets and fire. The night of doom. The week had started peacefully, with small testimonies filling the local fellowship. But on Wednesday evening, during a quiet midweek Bible study at the little village Deeper Lifehouse Fellowship, members began noticing strange shadows moving near the forest edge. Voices murmured in dialects unfamiliar to them. A few motorcycles zoomed past the settlement without headlights. Some brethren whispered that something was wrong. Others said it was nothing. Service ended, and members hurried home quietly, leaving only a handful behind who lingered to pray. Emmanuella felt uneasy, sensing a spiritual heaviness, but she joined the final prayers. Hours later, as the community slept, a sudden roar of motorcycles broke the quiet. Gunshots tore through the air. Dogs barked wildly. People screamed and ran into bushes. Houses burst into flames as armed men believed to be Boko Haram poured into Kaiama from the forest. Within minutes, chaos spread. The attackers shot sporadically, grabbing valuables, burning shops, and searching for young men to recruit. The worshippers still inside the fellowship hall froze in terror. Fleeing outside meant running toward armed violence. Staying inside meant waiting to be found. Gunshots echoed closer. Fire lit the night sky. Riders moved in circles like hunters surrounding prey. As the small hall trembled with desperate whispers and prayers, the attackers drew near. The quiet congregation realized they were trapped between faith and death. But within that moment of fear, a strange reality was about to unfold, one that would challenge everything they believed about the power of prayer. Miracle escape. The sound of heavy boots grew louder as the attackers approached the small fellowship building where Emmanuella and other believers remained hidden. Through the narrow church window, they could see armed men lighting torches and throwing them into houses. Flames spread across the village. Smoke clouded the air. The smell of burning wood and fear became overwhelming. Inside, some believers struggled to pray. One young convert, barely 3 months in the faith, whispered that perhaps they should surrender. He was trembling uncontrollably, convinced that escape was impossible. But before anyone could answer, Sister Emmanuella stood up, her voice steady despite the chaos. She declared with conviction, "Only the blood of Jesus can save us tonight. If we run into the bush, we run into their hands. If we open this door, we surrender ourselves. But if we trust God, He will fight for us." Her courage silenced the panic. Some began praying under their breath. Others cried quietly. The armed men drew nearer. A few of them came directly toward the fellowship door. The timber shook violently as they tried to force it open. The enemy seemed unstoppable. But then, something no one could have predicted happened. Suddenly, rain began to fall. It was not just a drizzle, it was a heavy downpour, as though the heavens opened within seconds. Yet just moments before, the night sky had been perfectly clear, no clouds, no wind. The torches the attackers carried began to fade. Within seconds, they went out completely. Fire that had engulfed nearby buildings fizzled and disappeared under the sudden rain. Confused shouts filled the air. The men stumbled about, unable to see or light anything again. Some cried that the place was cursed and commanded others to retreat. The downpour grew even heavier, thundering across the entire village, cutting off the attack completely. In the darkness, the attackers mounted their motorcycles and rode away in terror, leaving behind their destruction but unable to penetrate the little fellowship house. Hours later, as the rain finally slowed, the believers stepped outside. Not a single bullet hole touched the church walls. Not a single window was broken. And though several homes had burned, not one member of the Christian fellowship was harmed. Emmanuella's words became a living truth. Only the blood of Jesus saved them that night. A testimony that shook the town. At dawn, villagers who had fled into bushes slowly returned. They found the church intact, untouched, standing as though it had been shielded by an invisible wall. People gathered around, weeping, shaken by the miraculous escape. Emmanuella didn't waste a moment. She led them in prayer, thanking God for protecting them. As she prayed, fear melted into worship. Many gave their lives to Christ on the spot, surrendering to the God who kept them alive. Even the local Muslim hunter who was known in the village for bravery and bush skills came forward. In front of everyone, he said, "Your God saved this village. Not the soldiers, not the government. Only God." His word spread faster than news of the attack itself. Within days, the school began to fill up more than ever before. Parents who once feared sending their children now believed that the presence of the praying teacher brought supernatural protection. They wanted their children close to whatever power delivered the village. Soon, local pastors invited her to share her testimony across churches. They called her the Corper with the covenant. People listened with tears, with renewed faith, and with boldness. The village that once lived in fear began to worship with more confidence. The revival she had started through quiet evangelism now exploded into something none of them expected. In a place overshadowed by death, faith came alive. The impact beyond service year. Months passed, And as her service came to an end, the story of Kaiama's miraculous deliverance reached the ears of local authorities. On the day of her passing out parade, a high-ranking government official stood before the corps members and told their story, not as news, but as an example of unwavering service to the community. He spoke of a corps member who transformed not only education, but the spiritual confidence and unity of an entire town. Before the crowd, Emmanuella was recognized and honored. She didn't receive awards for academic seminars or social projects. She received a commendation for community influence, humanitarian impact, and spiritual support in a danger zone. It became clear that NYSC had never been about fulfilling a mandatory one-year program for her. It had been her mission field. When she returned to Lagos, she didn't come back as just another graduate. She returned with a deeper calling. She no longer saw ministry only in thriving cities or among comfortable congregations. Her heart began to burn for rural communities, forgotten by development but seen clearly by God. Her testimony had changed the course of her own life. Faith that preserves. The threat of terrorism in Nigeria has silenced entire communities, shut down schools, and turned worship into a risky act. Yet the story of Sister Emmanuella reminds us that even in the shadows of danger, the gospel still finds its voice. It reminds us that faith does not retreat in the face of fear, and that God still protects his people in ways that defy explanation. Her experience in Kaiama is more than a testimony. It is a reminder to young Nigerians that the NYSC uniform is not just national service attire. For those who carry the light of Christ, it is a calling, a mission, a chance to stand boldly where darkness reigns. Terror may intimidate people, but it cannot intimidate God. The village survived not because they had weapons, but because they had faith. And so, Sister Emmanuella leaves us with the truth her life demonstrated: God still preserves his own. Even in the most dangerous corners of this nation, his protection is not just history, it is present. It is real. And it is still at work.